this is Isabel from Patchwork Chicken Studio. I've been trying to make this tutorial for months and I've filmed it several times and it's just been one disaster after another, so I decided one more time. This is my third time is a charm, I hope anyway. I want to do a tutorial on how I make my baby quilt tops with the diagonal pattern, and it's not super hard and I'm just having a lot of trouble creating the video because I talk too much. But anyway, I want to show you kind of what I'm talking about. And so I have some of these that I've already made, and you can see sort of the diagonal that starts here and runs down. So see the diagonals running from that top left down to the bottom right. You can do these in whatever fabric that you want. Here's one that's kind of a patriotic, it's a little doggies on it. Or you can go very light. This one is a lighter color. It's just some simple pinks and greens. And these are a crib size quilt or a lap size quilt. So I'm making baby quilts, but you can just as easily make a lap quilt with fabric that you like. So I will put some measurements in, but what you need is 4 coordinating or contrasting fabrics, a half a yard each. And I am getting ready to make a baby quilt. So I am using these sort of peachy salmon colors. I have some little cherries and some flowers in my contrasting fabric. So you want something that is going to stand out when you're doing your diagonal, and you want all these fabrics to match each other. They're not going to clash with each other because they're all going to touch each other. So in the final result, you have to make sure that you've got your fabric right. So this is 4 different half-yard pieces, and I will cut these into 4.5-inch squares. So a half of that inch will become our seam allowance, and the 4 inches will be the squares on the quilt. So these are a 4-inch square. That's what you need to start with. I'm going to post up the little measurements there too in the video. I'm going to go through the process of how I lay it out, how I stitch it together, to get this result of this wonderful diagonal pattern. So hang with me. Next time I see you, we will have cut up fabric. Okay, so we're back with all of my squares cut. So I started with those half-yard pieces, and I cut these into 4.5-inch squares. I have 36 squares in each one of these piles, so there's 36 squares out of each half-yard of fabric. If you have less than that, your quilt will be a little shorter. If you have more than that, the quilt will be a little bit longer, but a crib quilt should be about 40 by 60. So 40 would be 10 of these squares wide, and the 60 would be about 15 of these squares long. Well, I find that this works just fine as 14 squares down, so it's at 56 inches instead of 60. And that is really a crib quilt size or a lap quilt. So if you're doing a quilt for yourself, you might pick completely different colors, but it's the same principle, same sizing. So now I need to decide how I'm going to line up my colors to get that diagonal. I'm not going to put like the 2 oranges together. I'm just not going to do that, those little peachy colors together, because they're not going to look right next to one another. We're not going to get a diagonal. These are very close in color. This one happens to have little cross hatches on it. This one is plain. So I'm not going to put those 2 together for sure. But what I want to do is going to figure out which color I'm going to start with, the top left of the quilt top, and what will be next to that one, what will be next to the peach color, which in this case will be one of the print patterns again, and then ending with another more solid color. I like the cherries. They were the first fabric I picked when I went to the quilt shop, so I'm going to put those at the upper left. I'm just going to leave this kind of low-key peach color here. I'm going to do the flowers next, and then I'm going to put the little crosshatch one here on the end. So I have my 4 colors, and the way I'm going to sew these is 1, 2, 3, 4, and then keep going. And so to be organized about this, I have to have these where I'm going to be able to reach them easily. They're always going to be in line. This is super important. And so I am going to stack them up here next to my machine, starting with the top left color and then the next color, the third color, the fourth color. Now, another thing to know about these squares is that all of these are facing the same way grain-wise. So if you know anything about fabric, fabric stretches on the crosswise grain. You see that little bit of stretch? And they don't stretch on the lengthwise grain. Having all of them be the same, regardless of whether you've decided to go the length or the width, have all of these the same. And you can do that easily when you're cutting these out, just to be consistent about how you make your little stacks. Having the crosswise for me allows me a little play when I'm trying to get nice corners, as long as they're all the same. So I don't want to flip any of these, or one's longwise. I'm going to make sure that they stay upright. So I'm going to load these up over here next to my machine. And this is something you should probably do when you have time to sit and actually do this without stopping, because it's going to be really important to be very consistent about what you're doing so you don't lose your diagonal when you're doing your stitching. So I am using a vintage machine. This is a Singer 319. I've had her for about 8 years or so. Actually found her at a Goodwill outlet, and my brother fixed her up for me, and I've been thrilled to have her. She does a really great job. She's fast and she's quiet. Mechanical machines like this are much better for this kind of work, I think, than a newer, more modern machine. They don't give me as much grief. But anyway, it is a vintage Singer, and I'll share a picture with you. Isn't she pretty? I love this machine. So I'm going to get started on piecing my quilt, and we're going to do this row by row by row. So you're going to do an entire row of 10 across, and then you're going to do another row of 10 across until you have a whole stack of all 14 of your rows. So it's a two-step process for putting this quilt top together. So I have my very top left, and I want to mark this because as I go through putting all of these rows together, this is my anchor, right? This is a point I know I can go back and I know what I'm looking at. So I'm going to put a pin in here. I'm using a glass-headed pin because I will iron this later when I'm ironing seams, and I don't want it to melt onto my fabric. You can still buy glass-headed pins. This one happens to be a vintage one, but if I iron on this, it's not going to melt. So I have my very first square, and I'm going to pull my next square from over here, and I'm keeping it the way I took it off of the stack. We don't want to turn these around because we want that crosswise to work there. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch my 1/4 inch seam on this very first set of squares. I am using a matching thread. I will use the same thread for everything on this, even though there's different colors in here. They all have the same color palette, so I will use the same. So we're going to do our 1/4 inch seam here. And that is my first two squares out of, I don't know, do the math, 36 times 4 is over 100. We're going to put over 100 together. So here's my first two. So now I want to grab my next fabric in line, which is this beautiful floral print. Again, I don't want to turn it. I want to leave it so that grain is exactly the way I stacked it up. I'm going to go ahead and do my 1/4 inch here. So there's 3. I got 3 there. I'm going to zoom this out just a little bit here. I'm going to go ahead and pick up the 4th color. So this is my little crosshatch. Again, don't turn it. I'm going to leave it the same way. Right sides together. And I'm going to go ahead and stitch this. So now we've done our first pattern, our first 4 in the right order. And we're going to do a whole bunch more. We're going to do a whole lot, but I'm not going to make you watch all that. But we are going to do 10 across. So I'm going to keep going until I have a row of 10 all the way across. So it's this pattern, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then again, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 2. I'll show you that as soon as I get that done. All right, so I have my 10 done. So you can see the 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. So I have 10. So this is the width of our quilt. and this gets, hopefully you have a table to work with. This gets a little unwieldy at some point. And I want to now think about what my next row should look like. So in order to get the diagonal, we'll start over here. I know that the next color below this one should be this fabric. Okay, does that make sense? So this one, this should be here, right? Because I want it to go diagonally. And so I'm not going to start the row with this fabric, right? This is the wrong one. I need whatever comes before the cherries. So what would be underneath here? So if I'm looking ahead, the one that comes before cherries is this little crosshatch pattern. So my second row is not going to start with this one. It's going to start with the crosshatch pattern. Okay, so I'm going to put this, I usually put this behind my machine. I make a stack as I go. I just lay it on the table back there. And I just stack it up doing one at a time. I can always look at my previous row to see what color I need to start with. So we're going to start with the crosshatch and then the cherries. And we're still going to go in order that we've laid our fabric out. Don't move that fabric. Again, I think it's best if you try to do this part of the piecing all in one time. Doesn't take me more than about 3.5 hours to do this quilt. I'm showing you how to do it, so of course it's going to take me a little longer. But generally I can have all the piecing done in about 3 hours, the cutting and the piecing. So now I know I've got my crosshatch. I'm at my cherry. What's next? Well, what's next is that plain little coral or orange piece. So I'm going to grab that. And my next color after this is that floral. So we're going to do the floral. So I'm not going to turn it, just flip it upside down. I'm going to keep that grain consistent. You'll be thankful you did that later. Okay, so here's our first 4 of our second row of 10. Math. Got to do the math. So I'm going to keep going. I will not make you watch this. I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to do the next set of colors. So again, this time it's the crosshatch, then the cherries, then the peachy color, and then the flowers. And I'm going to do this until I have 10. Okay, so I have my first 2 rows done, and I'm going to show you the ends here. This is my starting point, has the pin in it. So we can see that diagonal is starting to be created. Okay, so the trick is to continue to look at the beginning to know what the next color before that is, to get these all in line. So I laid this one. This is my second row now. I can lay it on top of the first row, and I lay it behind my machine. And if I was paying attention, I know that my next color is going to be the floral. So I'm going to do the floral and then the crosshatch. So let me do this row. This will be the third row. Let me do this row and come back and show you how that diagonal is really starting to pop. Okay, so I have 3 rows done. We're running out of space on the camera. But you can see this diagonal being started here. This is the cherries. There is the flowers. This is the crosshatch peach color, and this is the plain peach color. So you can see that diagonal starting to work. The farther you get down, the more obvious it's going to be. Right now, this is only 3, but you can see it, and that's the whole point of this particular layout, is to make sure that you're getting all of these in a diagonal. So I've done 3, which means I have 11 rows left to do. I'm not going to make you watch that, but I'm going to go ahead and finish my rows. Our next step after this is a specialized ironing that needs to be done for these in order for us to piece them together and get perfect corners, which I will go over with you in nice detail. So I'll be right back. Okay, I have pieced all of the rows and I had about 4 little squares left. So that's about right. If you do it and use everything you have, you'll get to 14 rows and you'll have 2 or 3, maybe 4 pieces left, which are not enough to do another row. So I have picked up my entire row. You can see I have these stacked up. So this row on top is the bottom of the quilt. The top of the quilt is the one with the pin. So it's up here. It's on the very bottom of my stack, but there's my pin. So this is important. And I wouldn't normally show you ironing because everybody knows how to iron. But when we start constructing these rows together, we need to be able to notch the seams together to get a really good result. And you can't do that unless you've taken the time to iron these in a particular way. So I'm going to start with my bottom one, and I want to have a place to go with my ironed pieces. So I have a table behind me, and you'll see why that's important here in just a second. So what I want to do is to iron all these little seams one direction. And I am using a very hot vintage iron. I prefer these over anything else because I don't have to wait. I don't have to hold anything. I don't have to steam anything. This will flatten those seams right away. So I'm going to do the ironing initially on this piece from the right to the left. And this does not take long. Again, super hot iron, and I do that to save myself time, but I like the result too. I have had some fancier irons, like a Rowenta. Not a fan. It doesn't get hot enough. This one gets hot. So just that one run, all of these seams are pressed that way. I don't want to get out of order, so it's super important that I'm consistent with every single row that I iron. I'm only going to iron a couple here for you so you can see how I'm doing it. So I'm going to pick this up and I'm going to turn around and I'm going to set it on the table just like that because I want to keep these in order. I'm going to do that every time so I don't get them out of order. You get them out of order, you lose your diagonal. So the next one, I'm not going to iron from the right to the left. I'm going to iron from the left to the right. So you got to be a little bit ambidextrous. So this one I'm going to start over here. And I am stretching this just a little bit as I iron to get those seams nice and flat. So I'm pulling it on the end that I'm coming towards. And there is my second row, which I'm going to pick up and go straight around and lay it on the top of this stack. I'm not going to turn them. I'm not going to go the other way. I'm going to do it consistently. So now I'm on my third one. This one needs to go from the right to the left. When we start notching these seams, you'll understand why it needs to be done this way. So this is my third one. Heading away, heading away, heading away to the right or to the left. From my right to my left, I'm going to pick this up, turn, and set it on top of this stack. So that's the way I'm going to be doing all of these. I'm going to go through this whole stack, and then I'll catch up with you again for the next set of piecing. Okay, so I have, let me zoom this out just a little bit. I have finished all of this ironing, and it's actually the next day. I did not get as far as I thought I would get last night. It was getting late. So anyway, we're on day 2 of this, but total overall construction is still going to be in the 3 to 5 hour range. So anyway, these are all my rows stacked up, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit because, oops, the other way. I want you to see that these seams are all pressed to the right, and this is my top row because there's my pin. The second row, they're all pressed this way, and we need it. So we need it to be that way. So every row is opposite of the row before it. Okay, so that's important. Also, my top row is back on the top. It's the first thing I stitched, but it was the last thing I ironed. Okay, so I'm going to set this whole stack behind my machine again, and I'm going to get ready to pin these and show you how to notch these so that you get beautiful, beautiful corners. Okay, so I have my first 2 rows pulled off of my stack back there. And I am going to pin these together so that I can sew them and I'm going to show you how to notch those corners. So this is my top. This is my second row. Okay, and we're going to put right sides together here. Now, a mistake I make very, very often, so often it's comical, is that I pin this up here, which when I'm done and opens up is the wrong way, right? This needs to be pinned on the bottom. Don't make that mistake, but if you do, don't feel bad. I have done it dozens of times. I don't know why. It's just kind of the way it goes. So I have got my pins here. I'm using a long pin with a very thin shaft. You want these to be a little bit bendable because they're going to go under the foot of your machine. You are going to sew over these pins. So you want some very fine pins, ones that have a little bit of bend to them so that you don't break a bunch of needles. There is no other way to do this other than to sew over your pins. So I know that's a little controversial. I do it all the time. I've been doing it for years. And I sacrifice a few pins once in a while and a needle once in a while just to get these beautiful corners. So when I put these together, because we pressed the hems the opposite way, or the seam allowances the opposite way, I am able to notch that fold in the fabric, that stitching line, into the other one. So if you can see this, these are like really matched together. And if I just throw this on the machine and sew, it's going to come apart. I'm going to get a gap there. My corners won't be nice. And all quilters want corners that are nice and tight where you can't see any kind of a gap. So to do that, I'm going to pin on both sides, just outside the seam allowance. Just like that. Okay. I'm going to go to the next one and I just mash these two pieces kind of together, kind of wiggle them around until I feel them become one solid piece. Okay. And again, I'm going to pin on both sides of that seam allowance because I want it to hold in place. The machine is going to skew it. Doesn't matter how good your machine is, you're still going to have a skew there. So I'm going to do this entire row. I'm going to double check I'm doing the right side. Yes, I am. Before I get too far, I've actually done it where I've stitched it and had to get out the seam ripper. So I'm going to go ahead and finish pinning this row, and then I'll show you the stitching and what our result is. So I have the first and second row pinned. I'm going to a 1/4 inch seam all along this edge, and then I'll show you what the corners look like. Now the other trick to this is if I'm looking at the back side, this seam goes this way and the machine is going to want to kick it back, especially the edge of the machine is going to want to kick it back, and so it'll come back this way. You want to make sure that that's laying flat when it goes under the presser foot. So I always check it an inch or two before I get there just to make sure it's laying flat towards the direction it's supposed to go. When you do the next row, it'll be the opposite, and so it won't be as difficult. But I have to check on these ones where the bottom goes towards the back of the machine. And if I get a spot where the fabric seems to be bigger than it needs to be or smaller than it needs to be to match this, because you want this to be really tight, you can stretch this fabric because this is on the crosswise. If you cut these right and you laid them right, this is on the crosswise, and it does have just the tiniest amount of stretch, and you can stretch it to meet its point. Now, if you accidentally sew one of those backwards, you can rip that part out. You should rip that part out and fix it. So better to be proactive so you don't have to rip anything out. But if you do it, don't leave it there. You will need it to be flat, so you're going to have to rip that part out. Okay. So I have my strip stitched, and I'm going to pull the pins so I can show you how this turned out. And you're going to do this row after row after row, and there's 14 rows, 13 stitches. But you're going to get through this pretty quickly. It doesn't take as long as you would think it would. So now I have my top row and my second row stitched together. I'm going to zoom this in a little bit so you can see this. So I am looking to see how good my corners are. And what I want is for everything to match those corners. That one's pretty good. There's just the slightest bit of gap. But here, this one is perfect. And so that's what you want. You want this little corner to be super neat and clean. Now, if you don't get them neat the first few times, that's not unusual. You can use that as part of your quilting and quilt over it and nobody will notice. But a quilter will always look at your corners. They shouldn't. There should be no judgment, but they do. They will look at these corners. So I'm going to continue and get this whole piece done, this whole top piece together. Probably take me about an hour, maybe a little less, and then I'll show you the completed product. We're almost there. Hang in there. And we're back. Finished all of those rows in the last 30 seconds between the end of the last video and this one, but actually not. Obviously this is the second day of me working on this. I've had a costume change, but I'm done. And so I want to show you what this looks like, and you can't see the whole thing, but you can see that diagonal pattern, and you can see how those colors pop out, the bright colors versus the more muted colors. And you can make this with any kind of fabric you like. You can think of themes like Christmas, Easter, 4th of July. I had a 4th of July quilt at the beginning of this video. Use your imagination there. What goes together for you in your mind? You can also upsize this pattern. So once you've figured out how to do it, and you've come up with a pretty good result a couple of times, you can upsize these squares to different sizes. So 6-inch will make about a twin size quilt. 8-inch will go even higher. 10-inch even higher than that. You can go up to a 12-inch block. So you can use some charm packs and some of those big, I don't know what they call those, the big 10-inch packs to work on a quilt like this. You just need that diagonal to give you that look. I really appreciate you watching and sticking with me through this. Hopefully this video isn't so long you just said the heck with that and turned it off. If you make one of these, I would love to see it. I just want to see what people do. And I want to see how you modified it for your own purposes. You can also check us out on the web, patchworkchickenstudio.com. There's a link at the end of the video. We are a business that makes things for people to buy for their kitchen. So bowl cozies, pot holders, some amazing totes, tortilla warmers, things like that. We always love having people come over and check us out. There will be more videos. These take me a long time to do, unfortunately, but we will be making more. And I do appreciate you sticking with me, watching to the end. Please leave me a comment. I love to talk to people. And I want you to have a really great night and take care.